Welcome back to Generation Influence, a new podcast that goes behind the scenes to talk to the marketers and leaders driving the e-commerce and influencer marketing spaces. I'm your host, Bill Hildebolt. I'm the co-founder of gen.video, a leading platform in the influencer marketing space that focuses on driving e-commerce success through multi-channel attribution analytics, turnkey content syndication, and white glove services for the best brands in the world. Check us out at gen.video. Today's guest is Marci Raible, VP of Integrated Marketing, Meals and Beverages, Campbell Soup Company. Welcome, Marci.
Hi, Bill.
Based on your business marketing major at Penn State, I'm gonna guess this was the plan all along, but tell us about yourself and your path to becoming a VP at Campbell Soup.
I wish I could say it was that plan. It was not, but I did know that I liked this balance of creativity and analytics. And so getting into advertising and specifically media, where I started, really gave that foundation of being able to work both sides of my brain. And I love what I do. And so I always joke that, I'm the person at the party who can talk about my job all day long, but it doesn't feel like I'm actually talking about my job. So that's how much I love it. When I think about my path, it is not a traditional CPG marketing path. I have been a subject matter expert my whole career. I started on the agency side and then jumped to the client side and started in media. Media has always been a part of the work, but broadened out to integrated marketing or marketing communications, whatever word choice you like to use, and have applied that to multiple categories. So I worked, after leaving the agency side, I went into telecommunications, went from telecommunications into finance, went from finance into food and beverage. What I would say is the common thread, because I've tried to say, what's the method to my madness? Is there something common as you look across this? And what it really is transformation. I was in the telecommunications industry when it was transforming into, broadband and wireless and broader communications. And so it really was, how do we make money when we're expanding into these areas that have a very different mix of, capital investment requirement? Then when I went into finance, I happened to join Bank of America 30 days before Bear Stearns collapsed. And how do you save a brand when, the entire financial industry is being looked at globally and re-looked at, and what role Bank of America played in it? And then I joined food and beverage, and it was a little bit like going back in time, because the consumer had not yet disrupted the industry. But then the pandemic hits, and the consumer disruption gets accelerated dramatically during that time. And so that red thread for me, and what I really thrive on, is that transformation, not only transformation of the industry, but also transforming the work that I do.
If we put the pandemic in a box and we understand that is part of that transformation, that definitely makes sense. But I still think it's profound to hear you use the word transformation when you're talking about an iconic American brand like Campbell Soup. And so, and it's funny because in the first couple episodes of the podcast, we've talked a lot about change, and it struck me that, all the marketers, they talk about, like, if you're not changing, you're dying. And to me, as a listener, and I suppose I experience it too as an executive in my company, right? That idea of just continuous change is so frightening viscerally. And so to hear that you thrive on that is awesome and exciting. And we're going to definitely talk about this idea of, how do you, as we go through the conversation today, I'm sure the legacy of Campbell Soup, and what does that mean, and how do you protect but evolve that at the same time? So I love the setup that we're right there at the beginning. But before we go too much into Campbell Soup, I definitely want to make sure we glean more insights from this incredible career path that you've had. And maybe let me start with, is there anything that you thought you had learned, either in telecom or in financial services, that you thought was a marketing truism that you have had to unlearn as you've come into new roles?
I don't know that I thought it was a marketing truism, but I would say that one thing, you move down a path, it's all about testing and learning. So you test something, you see it doesn't work, you put it aside, you move on. And what I have definitely learned is you can't always put it aside and never bring it back. And so because the world is changing so much, that whole idea of tried it, didn't work, don't think about it again, you really have to put that aside and make sure you're constantly evaluating where your brand is, where the world is, if you're working with, PR or media, where the industry is that you're working in, both from a subject matter expert perspective, as well as maybe the category that you're operating in, what's happening with that, how has that changed? And sometimes you need to dust those things off that didn't work before and bring them back in and test them again. I've actually had that happen where you did it once, it didn't work, you brought it back a few years later and it did. And so sometimes it's just a little bit about the timing and, the right ingredients, so to speak, from a cooking aspect, the right ingredients, and just making sure you don't forget about things or write them off if they didn't work the first time.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. I love that insight. That is a lesson I feel like I am it's constantly being taught to me, and I'm not sure I'm learning. And so, so what I'm trying, and again, so I've been in the technology space, for 20 years, and there are definitely so many things that we tried, and when we said, oh yeah, no, this is not going to work, this didn't work, like, let's forget about it. And then you come back 5 years later and you're like, those guys are building a huge business out of our idea.
Totally. Yes.
That's so annoying. So that is a brilliant lesson, and I love the way you articulated it. Is there anything, so transformation, so leaning into change, obviously a lesson that carried forward. Is there anything else that has struck you as, wow, this actually really does apply across? I mean, this is so different. Telecom, finance, and consumer packaged goods. You couldn't have picked 3 more different industries to my mind. And so is there anything else other than just not being afraid of change and leaning in that you do find is consistent across all 3?
Well, the consumer, really, going deep on that consumer, really understanding that consumer, that is consistent across all. So I think that's the starting point for everything, right? Yes, then you apply your understanding of your brand and understanding, the category dynamics that you're operating in and everything that goes along with it. But that starting point of deeply understanding your consumer, either, who your current consumer is and how do you keep them, retain them, or who do you need to go acquire, that understanding and that as your starting point, I think is just the grounding piece. And if you always keep that in mind, your ability to move across categories keeps your mind fresh. You got to always be learning. So I do think that is probably what has made it easier for me, is just that's where you always start. I think the other thing that is also something that I've kept with me the whole time too is don't fall in love with your own ideas. You can be really passionate about the idea. You're bringing the idea through that you think is the best recommendation based on, the ask that has come forward, but being open to hearing others' thoughts about it, how they build on it, or where they ask questions about it can actually make it better. And so I think being open, how you receive that feedback is as critically important as being passionate about what you're bringing forward, and can always make it better.
Great answer. And, you made me think of something that I don't know if this is tangential or part and parcel, what you just said. So I'm going to throw it out there, and it's maybe a little bit of a curveball, but one of the transformations that's occurred since you've been going down this path, right, is the idea of brands giving up control. We don't really use that phrase anymore, but 10 years ago, we were using that phrase a lot, giving up control of the brand to the consumer as the advent of social media, grew and grew and grew until this idea that suddenly the consumer was participating in the creation of the brand was really hard for marketers circa 10 years ago. Now, I think it's frankly like it's just so built in that no one even talks about it anymore. But you touched on it actually in a couple different ways in that answer, including, know your consumer. And so now you've got, and I know we're going to talk later about like data and kind of CRM, but when you say know your consumer now, does that include I'm going to call it the qualitative sharing of kind of the brand that occurs on social media? Or for you, does know your consumer really start with and end with the data? Like, how does that social media piece fit in on just specifically know your consumer?
I think it's both, because I think when you're just looking at the data is critical, really understanding that, being grounded in it, knowing what's happening, but also being aware of how consumers are talking about your brand. How they're engaging with it? Who are your brand fans? What do they look like? That is critically important. It's the validation, right? Is the data actually what's happening in real life? A lot of times we talk about looking at social listening and search. Social listening is what they're talking about, then search is what they're actioning, when they're actually raising their hand. And if you only look at one piece, you don't see both sides of the equation. And so I think it's that same thing. You have to be grounded in the data and that understanding, and then it's the validation of what's really happening live in the market, and using search and social as those real-time feedback loops.
Parameters. Yeah. Now we've talked in some generalities. Let's start bringing it into Campbell Soup directly. Very happily, Campbell Soup recently had a great earnings call, which stands out because of the rest of the world, not so much. And it actually has been a truism for a long time now that Campbell is a great stock to own when the world seems scary and uncertain, which I think is a fair commentary on where a lot of consumers are. Soup is comforting, it's nutritious, it's a great value. And the earnings report spoke to me and said, oh, this is still true, even though this is a company definitely in transformation. For you, does that make it easier or harder to launch and market new products? As you try to move the company down this transformation path, what's resonating with consumers now, and including on this sort of, let's make it specific, on the spectrum of nostalgia versus novelty and innovation?
So my role is really about how do we bring activation? How do we activate our brands, be it new or existing? And so it really is where is that consumer today? And yes, how do we engage with them? What's going to drive the engagement? What's going to capture their interests? Stop the scroll, etc. And so when you think about nostalgia versus novelty, right? I think is what you said. When you think about that spectrum, where it is today is really a mix of both. And you can't think about one or the other. And I think with some of our brands like Campbell's as the example, you can get very caught up in nostalgia, because I can't tell you the number of people that when I get introduced as working for Campbell's, the first thing they say is good, or they tell me their story about their love of the brand or what memories it triggers for them, which is an amazing place for a brand to sit and have that connectivity. But there's also the novelty. We can't just live on that. That's all about like looking back. And so what we want to make sure is we're also a part of the here and now, and where they are here and now in their life, but also where they're going. And so for us, it's that mix of the two, right? It's nostalgia with a modern twist. And you see that in how we bring recipes to life, right? This is with Swanson, but classic mashed potatoes, and then everything bagel mashed potatoes. So really thinking about everything be it recipes that we bring forward, or ideas, marketing ideas that we bring forward to drive consumer engagement. It really is the combination of those two things versus relying on one or the other. I think novelty without any of that, that connectivity and authenticity is just a stunt. And nostalgia is just kind of keeping us in a box. And so what we really want to do is bridge the two to keep us right on right in the here and now, and right there with you in your life today.
Yeah, that sounds like a very fun balance to try to hit. And I am definitely one of those people that I know loaded you up with my nostalgic memories of Campbell. So I'm definitely part of the crowd.
We love them.
That is, I can see that would definitely be a lot of fun. You've mentioned to me in past conversations that there are two fundamental drivers for Campbell marketing: modernizing the brand, and you've started touching on that, and then pushing the performance marketing side. So tell us if there's any more you want to add on modernizing the brand. definitely do it, but you've definitely also set a great foundation there. And it is so iconic and positive that I get this visual of a museum curator with white gloves handling this precious vase. And so, and I think about that, I think, oh my gosh, the responsibility that a marketer would feel in that role. So how do you preserve but modernize at the same time?
I love this question because it's actually one of the reasons why I came to Campbell's. I think the Campbell's brand is so iconic, so loved. It had a lot of nostalgia, not necessarily a lot of that, kind of in the now, current, relevance to it. And so it was, how do you take this brand and get to put your fingerprints on it and set it up for the next 150 years, and making sure that you do that in the right way. And so I think as we think about it, myself, my team, the broader organization, marketing organization, is really understanding, the brand. So what is that brand truth, and really making sure that we have that understanding so that we can be authentic. And when we're thinking about, partnerships or collabs, or even how we evaluate messaging, can you see Campbell's in it? That deep consumer understanding, so that brand truth plus that consumer understanding, that consumer insight, it's those two things together, and then layering on that cultural truth. And so it's going beyond just the, the brand and the consumer, because that can equal anytime. That cultural truth is what makes it in the moment, in the now. And I think that three-legged stool is really what gets you to, modernizing, but doing it in the right way, and staying really true to the brand and what made it so special and makes it so special in so many people's lives.
Let's turn to the core of it, to pushing performance marketing. And I'm just fascinated that an omni-channel food brand is thinking this way and putting a lot of energy into this. I know from our conversations, you've got kind of 4 tenets to the transformation roadmap. Can you walk us through them?
So the transformation roadmap is just a thing that I did for my team. It's something I learned early in my career about really thinking, where are we? Where do we want to get to? How do you build that path? Make sure you can actually define it so that you can bring others along with you. Because if you're the only one who's doing it, you can't get very far. And I would say, just to add to that, I've also gotten good feedback of making sure that list isn't too long, because I have a high tolerance for having a lot of things on my list. But how do you really focus it? So again, you can really get the rest of the team and get others along for the ride, right? Get them on the bus with you. So the 4 that we're really focused on right now are: 1, continuous improvement, which really gets to that performance mindset. And that is really, it can sound like never satisfied, which is not the intent of it, but it is really looking at what's happening and trying to identify those areas where we can make it better. So what's working, what's not working, optimize into what is, what's working better, make it even better. So it's always about, is there something that we can do to just raise the bar? So that's continuous improvement. Gives me a lot of energy, hopefully gives other people energy too, because it feels like you're in control, right? You have choices to make, levers to pull. The second is around data and performance dashboards, and that is really about the visibility of what we need to look at to deliver what the business needs and expects us to do. And there's so much data out there right now. This becomes critically important. It's not about just having data, but it's having the right data and having it at the right speed. If you can't get it at the right speed, what are proxies that you're going to use instead? How do you wait, but still make things better? And then dashboarding it so that it can be a focused conversation. So everybody's looking at the same data, and you can really have rich conversations about it. So that data and performance really going together. And then the third area is kicking ass in social. You talked about social earlier. It's a very dynamic space. A lot of messaging out of your control, because there's a lot of UGC going on out there. You also have the fact that younger audiences don't necessarily want to follow brands, or they want to follow the brands that maybe are sexier than what some of some food and beverage brands are. And so how do we really think about that? What's the right way that we show up? How do we show up? Where you brought up the voice of others, right? How do we think about that balance of our voice versus the voice of others? And really make sure that we're going to market and on platforms in a really authentic way. And then the fourth is around marketing innovation, which I love. I think a lot of times, particularly in our space, innovation is very closely associated with product innovation. And so what we're really trying to do is make sure that marketing innovation gets as much attention as the product innovation. We're here to support the product innovation, but how do we make sure that we're really raising the bar and pushing the needle on the marketing side too, and continuing to invent or reinvent how we come to market to drive business performance.
On that last one, I love the way you said marketing innovation and product innovation. You and I've talked about my father actually worked in product at Campbell Soup many decades ago, and worked on Prego, and obviously on the product side, as I said, but he remained lifelong friends with the marketing folks who made that product so successful, and appreciated that without the marketing innovation, his product innovation would have never taken flight. And so it was really, that was a great homage, and I love that. I just want to say one thing on continuous improvement. It was interesting, you talked about, it's not to say dissatisfied, but to always move forward. And it's funny that you even went there, because just another quick sort of anecdote. When I was in college, I had this thought, you've always got to be driving yourself forward. And I wanted to get a license plate that said, was it going to be a vanity license plate? It was going to say unsatisfied. And my girlfriend at the time was like, you cannot do that. That is such an insult to me. And I was like, no, it doesn't mean I'm unsatisfied with you. It means I'm unsatisfied. There's more to be done in this world. And she nixed it. But I'm with you. We should all celebrate. We should never be satisfied, right? This is what keeps us going literally as a species. So we're gonna say continuous improvement there's nothing even to talk about there, because that is definitive. So data.
I feel like I should be breaking into the song from Hamilton.
Exactly. So we're going to start with data, because there's so much to talk about on data. And so the first thing about data is, when I hear data and you try to pull apart the data, I hear, you didn't actually say these exact words, but I hear shopper journey and trying to track the consumer through that shopper journey. And, one of the other guests on the podcast said something interesting that was also, again, one of these almost terrifying moments, that there is no more shopper journey. There's no beginning, there's no end, there's just the experiences, and you've got to try to figure out new boxes to put them into. And so I want to ask you, because you are spending a ton of time in data, do you agree? Or is there a counterpoint to that? Would you say, no, there's actually still a journey, but it looks like this, or it's evolving like this? What do you think?
I think the shopper journey is a piece of the overarching consumer journey. So that's one thing that I would just say. I don't think that it's the traditional funnel. So I totally agree with what the former guest was saying. I don't think it's a traditional funnel, 3 steps and you're done approach to it. I do think it's much more complex. I think for most categories, people jump in and out at different points in time. And I think the other thing in today's world, we can make any touch point shoppable. There are so many different ways to make things shoppable in today's world that really lets the consumer decide what their journey is. It could be, I'm on Pinterest, I want this, I buy it. I'm watching this video that interests me, click to buy. So versus, oh, I saw that, now I'm going to go to the store on the weekend, then I'm going to look for it in the store, then I'm going to buy it. So that's why I think that there is no shopper journey, is because there isn't one of them. There are like a million of them. And so for us, I think as marketers, what we really have to understand is, what is that consumer journey? Which touch points can I make shoppable? And then which touch points should I make shoppable? And so I think it's just another strategy that we need to think about as we're building out our activation plans.
Give me a data source that that you feel is evolving very quickly and that you're really excited about. I mean, I got to assume you're still, doing mixed media modeling. You're looking at, store checkout data. Maybe you're looking at things on social, but where's the data growing and expanding in ways that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm having so much fun kind of playing with this and digging into this?
I don't know that it's a single data source. I think what I'm really interested in is we take a layered measurement approach. So you have a marketing mix model, right, which gives you a great readout at the end of the campaign. I think there are a lot of companies that are working on how do you get that information faster, but it's still that same methodology, right? It's still an impression-based methodology. And so that works really well for some and not for others. So I think it has, great use cases, but it's how do you actually layer in other points, sales lift versus brand lift, et cetera, MTA. So how do you think about a layered approach? And for me, the exciting part is then the connectivity between those, so that ultimately what I want to get to is my front end metric. I know the causal relationship to the end of campaign performance, so that I know I'm optimizing against the right thing if I want to drive short-term sales, or I want to drive brand lift, or whatever KPI you're going after. So for me, the exciting part is the connectivity between all of the different analytics options. And it can also be the frustration when they don't align. And then you're trying to figure out, why don't they align? This would have told me to do this, and this tells me to do something else. And how do I figure that out? So it can be frustrating, but also really fun.
I heard intellectual, right at the very end, intellectual dissonance, right? When the data and your hypothesis are not matching up. And that's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's one actually that I love, because again, it's that idea that, oh, there's something we don't understand yet, right? It's like the idea that science continues to move forward. And so I see you lighting up, and I'm like, yes, we would get along great tackling things like this. Is there anything, on the data side where you're like, oh, this is still just not there. I wish it was further along, but either it's going to take a couple more years, or maybe it's never going to get there. And like, we just have to work around this as basically a data gap. Anything like that on the data side that you just wish somebody could solve it?
Well, there are two things I would say. First, my previous companies that I worked with were, had big first party data engines behind them. And I don't think I realized how easy it is when you have that big first party data engine that you can tap into and build off of, versus when you work in CPG, and specifically for Campbell's, where we have said we will continue to sell through retailers, right? We will continue to partner with retailers for where to find our products. And so with that, I don't own that end consumer relationship.
Yeah.
And so that deep consumer understanding all the way to purchase, and having that clear view, right? That clean view of what happens, and taking away the blind spots. That's something that for those of us who don't sell direct to consumer, we have to work through. And it's much, much easier when you have that clear view from start to finish. So that's one thing that I would say we just have to keep working at it. And how do we have to also, because it's about piecing together information versus having one stream that you can read off of. And getting smarter by thinking about it as, how do I get smarter by having multiple pieces of information versus being limited to only one, is how I would choose to look at it. So I would say that is the one piece. And then the second is just, how do we get the data faster? So I think there's always, right, when you think about what you take to market, I think we're always talking about, is there enough there to get a read, or are we coming to a conclusion too early? And what's that feasibility that you've reached enough people to get a clean read? And so how can we get lower feasibility thresholds so that we can actually get reads faster? That's where you get that layered approach, which can help you do that, paying attention to the data plus the qualitative, what's coming through, in the comments of the social feed and things like that, where you can start layering to give you that confidence. But I think those are the two things. One, how to make sure we don't have blind spots or take away blind spots. And the second would definitely be speed.
Yeah. That really resonates. As you were going through that awesome answer, I started thinking about a college student who is about to graduate from Penn State.
Mhm.
She's got an interview at Campbell. She's so excited. She somehow finds this podcast and, she's inspired to watch. And as she's listening to this part, she's like, wait, and maybe Penn State doesn't teach the classes this way, but it just, in my mind, I have this visualization. She's like, I want to do marketing because it's creative and, and I want to make amazing commercials. And all we're talking about here is a bunch of math. And if I wanted to do math, I would have been a math major.
Yes.
So what's your advice to her? That marketing has become a very quantitative discipline. And I'm not sure that's what some people signed up for. I think whether or not you signed up for it, you love it. But how do you talk to that person who is so excited about the creative side, but unsure about the math side?
I think it's the mix. I think it's the mix of both, right? So there's definitely the creative side. I could talk on and on about the creative ideas that my team has brought to life, which I think really showcase the brand and help to modernize it. So I think there's a lot to talk about on the creative side as well. We do have this conversation often, right? The design with our package design team, right? They're all designers, and how does data flow into that? And I think in that instance, it is about how the data can actually make the creativity even better, and using the data not to overwhelm or suffocate the creativity, but actually using it to unleash even more, I guess is the best way to say it. Because what could be better than someone who is a designer or a creative, an ECD at an agency, understanding I created this and here's how the consumer responded to it, and here's how the business, impacted, and for good or bad, right? I think because I grew up in a lot of performance marketing, the stuff that doesn't work, you learn more from than the stuff that does. And so to me, I think it's using data not to overwhelm or squelch the creativity, but actually to unlock even more.
You're going to do fine in that interview, Penn State marketing major, and Campbell wants you, so stay the course. All right, so tell me a little bit more about kicking ass in socials. I'd say some people might think it was the greatest of times. Everyone's making recipe content, and you guys just get to sit back and enjoy the ride as people integrate your products into these recipes. I feel like I could argue the opposite side as well. It's like you made the party possible, but you aren't necessarily on the guest list. A lot of it's kind of happening, again, on different publishing sites, et cetera. And, and that's different than years past when I was a kid, when there were literally, and there probably still are, recipes right on the soup can, and, and mom used those recipes, right? So how do you get yourself invited and remain a welcome guest at the party that you started?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think this is the fun part of what we do. And I think what we saw and have seen over the past few years is this, you have people on both ends of the spectrum. So you have the group that's cooking, but wants simple and easy. And then you have the group that, has the cooking at home over the past, 2-3 years really elevated not only their interest in it, but also their abilities and capabilities. And so really thinking about all of the audiences, not just one. And I think that's the first thing. The second is really talking about that, our voice versus the voice of others, and going back to what I was saying around the brand truth and the consumer insight, and how those two things come together. So then how do we show up authentically? So where can we show up authentically? And that shouldn't be a one size fits all. Those might be, 30 minutes or less, easy recipes. Those might be hacks, really simple things to do during the week, but they can also be the complex. And so really making sure that we're thinking about that full spectrum to deliver against where we can authentically deliver from our own voice. And then where can we actually use the voice of others, where our products can actually be used through others and show up in places that they would be unexpected. And quite honestly, if we said it, it wouldn't really resonate, because that's us saying hey, use our product here too, versus someone who's already cooking in that style or with those recipes, or, you know, elevated. We did a program with Richard Blaze earlier in the fall, and you know, he wrote his first cookbook, I think, was about elevated recipes at home. And so when he is talking about how you can use Campbell soup within those recipes to get to elevated meals at home, that's much more authentic because it's what he does. So if he's choosing to pick up a can of Campbell versus me telling you it, you know, it's just, it makes more sense.
Even though the topic was kicking ass in social, what I really heard was just being deeply embedded and, you know, and being soft, in a sense, but to get to the outcome that is kicking ass in social.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now there was a lot of innovation and marketing in that answer, but innovation and marketing is a separate pillar. Are there any specific case studies or examples you'd like to share where you felt like you guys have done something great innovation in marketing?
I feel like I could wax poetic about my team.
Feel free.
Settle in. I think, well, first, I think when we started talking about marketing innovation, where we started was really defining what it meant to us. So I would say anybody who's thinking about it, making sure that that definition is clear so that you know what you're going to classify as it or not. And for us, one of the key things was that it had to pull through to brand and or business impact, because otherwise, you know, it can be bright and shiny, but if it doesn't actually elevate my brand or the business results, then did it really matter? We might feel great about it, but it didn't do what it needed to do and what we're charged with doing. And so I think that is critically important for us when we think about it. I would say, you know, if you just go back to this last holiday season, we had a whole program that we called Side Season, which was really about Campbell's and how we show up during the holidays on tables, right, with the sides. So hence Side Season. And as a result of that, we actually created a side plate, which was all built around the premise that people prefer sides, and having a little fun with that on TikTok, and, you know, recipe creation from the, you know, the expected and the nostalgia, you know, recipe that you grew up with, as well as those with a modern twist. So pushing that, that modernization, but also that creativity that comes to the table, and being able to have Campbell be a part of both ends of that spectrum.
What a great way to kind of bring everything together. I heard all the way back to the nostalgia, but novelty to consumer insights that would have come from the data. I definitely saw myself in the preference for sides, and you know, everything just kind of came together with those examples. That was awesome. All right, so let's end the serious part of this. I do have one fun last question, a little bit of a twist here.
Okay.
And so as you know, but maybe the audience doesn't know, we met through this process, which has been great. And so I checked out our mutual contacts on LinkedIn, which is always a fun thing that probably a lot of people in the business world do. And we have this incredible list of mutual overlapping contacts, which again is fun because we only just met. And so I have to think that there's some stories in here. And so first I'm going to read the list so that all these amazing people, you know, get a shout out in the social world. And then let's dish a little bit on this list. See, you know, anybody you want to talk about who you really love and why, or any great stories about any of these people. Or even if there's anybody on the list, you're like, I don't even know how I know them. But so wherever you want to go, maybe we'll each take one or two. And again, I just thought it was so neat how many people we have in common. So there's Mark Edmondson, Georgine Anton, Quentin Waltz, Gary Vaynerchuk, which I think makes both of us seem like we're pretty cool. We know
Hope
Gary
so.
Yes. Carissa DeBrency, John Bond, Steve McGowan, Jack Myers, and Charles Vila.
So it was funny when thinking about that. I would say Quentin, it was great to see Quentin's name on the list. because I haven't talked to him in a while, but I met him very, very early in my career, probably like my first job, I think. I would have met him and then worked with him consistently across.
Oh.
And it was like a blast from the past to see his name. But I think, and it struck me because when I thought about him, I was like, oh, Quentin, because one, he's just one of the nicest people I've ever met, and always had some really great like things going on in his life and stories and that aspect of it. But also really creative, like a really creative thinker, creative problem solver. And I think I also always felt, I think he was on the media sales side when I knew him. And a lot of times with salespeople, they can show up when you have money, but not show up when you don't have money. And so I think with Quentin, like that was not a filter. Like he always was just there. And so I think that is why he was just always so great to work with, and always, you always take that call.
Well, we're definitely going to do a shout out for Quentin. He is a great guy. I don't know him nearly as well as you do, but that's going to make him feel good to hear that story. So the one I'll pick is Mark Edmondson, which is interesting. So when I first started this company, co-founder gen.video, we were different name, different thing. And so we were kind of doing this thing where consumers could do video reviews of products. And so our idea was, instead of doing text reviews, people would eventually do video reviews. Video is more powerful, et cetera. And so we had just kind of gotten cranked up doing it. I mean, this is a long time ago. Like YouTube was like a fledgling business at this point. And, it was one of those things where you're like, will a brand ever notice what we're up to? And we get this email from this guy. He's at Procter & Gamble, and his name is Mark Edmondson. And he's like, what are you guys up to? You seem to be doing something that's like a cross between a focus group and a TV commercial using real people. And we've noticed at P&G, and, we want to meet you. And the ironic thing is that P&G quickly grew to being our largest customer. We were working like across all the brands, but I never actually did a deal with Mark. And I think I met him once in the lobby of P&G. And so this guy gets all this credit for basically launching my business in a sense, but never actually have like developed that closer relationship. So I'm going to do a shout out to Mark and just, through this video, say thanks to him. He continues. I've tracked him the whole time through LinkedIn. He's done amazing things, been a lot of places. And so how do you know Mark actually?
Oh, I know Mark from here at Campbell. He worked at Pepperidge.
Right.
When I first joined, and then he moved to the e-com team and worked in an enterprise role in e-com. So I know him from here. I could hear his voice when you were talking about him calling and saying, what are you guys doing? I could hear his voice. Super fun to work with, creative thinker, definitely. Yeah. Great job now. So I love seeing good things happen to good people.
That is great. Awesome. All right. Well, this has been a ton of fun. Marci, thank you so much. I know the audience is going to get so much out of it. If they get half of what I got out of it, it is a huge home run for anybody who listens. So we really appreciate the time. And again, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I loved having the conversation.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Generation Influence drop every Wednesday, so be sure to subscribe to listen on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Next week's guest is Laura Gustafson from Elanco, a leading animal health company. You don't want to miss Laura. She's a CPG e-commerce pioneer. Hope to see you there.